to use it. Okay, so with the recent updates to the NIST in Europe, HIPAA, and cyber insurance policies being updated this year, well, compliance is probably the second hottest topic in the MSP space, right after AI. So James Levy has brought two special guests to discuss it: an MSP industry veteran and specialist in cyber insurance for MSPs. So two guys who spend every day in the front line of compliance. So take it away, James.
Thank you for that, Fernanda. For attendees who haven't seen me before, again, I'm James Slavey. I've been in solutions and product and campaign marketing at Acronis for 9 years. I hardly believe that myself. Mainly in an evangelist role, promoting cyber protection solutions to our MSP partners, and more recently, I've been focusing on our enterprise customers and prospects. I spent half my career with cybersecurity vendors like Acronis, also at networking vendors in product management, product marketing, solutions marketing type roles. The other half at analyst firms like Forrester Research covering cybersecurity and networking. Go to my LinkedIn profile. You want to know more about me. The real juice here is in my two panelists here. So let me introduce you to them. Peter Avery is the VP of Security and Compliance at Visual Edge IT. He spent over 30 years in technology services and has had prior management roles in cybersecurity, IT operations, sales, and field service. Welcome, Peter.
Great. It's great to be here. Thank you very much.
Awesome to have you here, Peter. My other esteemed panelist is Carlson Choi, who is the CEO of Cork Protection. If you don't know Cork, they've created the first and only cyber risk monitoring and warranty product for the MSP community, something I encourage you to look into. He's also had senior leadership roles in digital transformation, marketing, and sales at several Fortune 500 companies. Welcome, Carlson.
Well, James, thank you for the intro. I'm glad that $100 paid off. It gave me a second.
I'm not cheap, but I can be had. All right, we only have 20 minutes here, guys, so let's jump right into it. The topic du jour is NIST 2.0, and I wonder if you could set the table for our audience here and talk a little bit about how NIST 2.0 has evolved from the kind of first edition of NIST in ways that are meaningful to our MSP audience here. Anybody can start here.
Sure. I'll start out, Carlson. So NIST is a great framework, basically rules of engagement, industry standard. It's been around for a long time. Just about all the other ancillary frameworks have peeled off from NIST, HIPAA, and some of the other ones. It gives a set of rules to start from, and all security posture should be built on a strategy, and the adoption of a framework is a good first step in that strategy. NIST 1.1 versus 2.0, the biggest changes that have happened, the big one is govern. So now there's the govern component to it. Oversight is built into that as well. And third-party attestation is also included in that as well. So it's expected that you're going to have a third party come in, examine what you've done to prove that you've done the correct thing. The other big change too was around supply chain. So Gardner Group said that over 45% of organizations worldwide have been impacted by software supply chain attacks. And so that's a big target that that NIST has identified and included in the framework as well.
Yeah, I'll kind of add on to that a little bit. I think thank you for kicking that off, Peter. So I think, spending most of my day, not 24/7 with the MSP community, I think one of the probably the major pieces that I think Peter touches that additional, area of governance, right? And that really put a different type of controls in beyond just, the 1.0 was really the baby step of to it. What is the best practice when it comes to having good security posture, having good, I would call cyber hygiene, right? Now that governance equation really become a lot more expansive than just purely at the core infrastructure, but rather, like as you heard from Peter, extend into third-party vendor and the supply chains. Because as we probably know today, with cyber attack, it is not, it's not an if, it's a when. And as a matter of everybody that has digital business, it touches us. So what they have done in this 2.0 is really extending that to expand its boundary and making it more a living document. It's an ongoing update that's going to be seen.
Can you talk a little bit about governance functions here? I'm not sure everyone thinks about governance every day. particularly if you're a lot of your clients are relatively small organizations. Could you fill that out a little bit?
So a lot of it is understanding your risk management, making sure that the right people are in the right roles, making sure that there's oversight in that roles and responsibilities, making sure that the policies are driving that responsibility as well. So you combine all of those together, and then you add the third party of third party attestation, and you start to get to a point where the proof is in the pudding. So each person within the organization has responsibilities, and you layer that with that third party oversight, and you no longer have a network admin that just flies through a framework, puts in anything that's there. You have to have an industry expert basically saying, okay, when this control says this, it means this. You don't have that in place right now. Let's work together to resolve it.
Yeah, I think what I observe on my day to day now, especially with this new concept with the governance, right? If you take a look at the MSP space, we all know this pretty well. A lot of MSP are various size. They go from one man shop, one woman shop, all the way up to hundreds, a plus individual. But the community they typically serve a small medium business. Your favorite, I would say, restaurant down the street, your favorite laundromat, and a different individual chain in place. When it comes to governance, I think the what we have learned over the years is the governance is pretty much a business says MSP, you do everything you need to do. That's yours to take. I thought you took care of that. With this new governance equation, what we see the evolution of is that we're now seeing these security focused MSSP, the MSSP community is now partnering with MSP who doesn't necessarily have that expertise, right? Because in order to really get deep in some of the cyber hygiene and the governance and procedure, they're gonna need that third party oversight. We're seeing the evolution of MSSP getting involved, partnering with MSP to provide that level of governance and for that matter, training, right? At the end of the day, you can have the most secure security stack, the best tool set. If the end user click on that email to say, oh, it looks like what Peter asked me for, here you go. It just happened more than less. It's a lot more than just tool set, but it's also the human element and having that level of governance and training involved.
Right. So you're working with MSPs every day. Presumably, you've already spent a lot of time talking about NIST 2.0.
Yep.
What are the kind of issues you see that are confusing to them about it, whether or not they have prior experience with the NIST framework, and what kind of clarity are you offering to them around it?
Well, I will just say this, right? I think what you see a framework is just how you think, how you work, how you put your practice together, right? And I think there are a couple of things I look at in piece. One, I work with MSPs that look, you don't need to become a PhD in, mathematics in order to understand it. These are just a way of thinking, or do you have controls put in to all different categories that they, in this framework, they break in, I think, 20 plus category with 100 plus control plays. Are you, or do you have critical procedure around the critical control that matters? There's again specific attack like ransom or BEC in place. Be very specific on the output. Second to that is probably more importantly is always encouraging them not to allow the end client to say, hey, you know what, that's okay. I don't need that because it really slows me down. The reality is you as an MSP, you become accountable for it legally by allowing that to happen. I mean, I'll tell you a story. There's actually an actual story I shared from one of the partner we work with. One of their client, refused to have a security control put in. In fact, they made the MSPs, so the MSP say, look, you got to sign this letter that attests that you are not, you refuse to put these control in. In matter of weeks, they got popped.
Wow.
Business is shut down for, I think, what I've heard a couple of days already. I mean, this is detrimental. Now, at the end, of course, the CEO go, well, what happened? Of course, immediate reorganization, CTO, everybody, the end clients were gone. But was that necessary? So those are the example I actually shared with my MSP partners. Say, you need to share those examples to your client that do you really want that to happen? If you do this is high risk. And even for the MSP themselves is, do you want a client like this for yourself? It's really a question about where do you want to grow? And I think that to me has always been one of the education points in place. Use a framework, but take some real-time example to educate your client.
One of the things on top of that, so adoption of a framework is great, and going through the exercises is critical in establishing that. But pairing that with a risk assessment helps the customer understand the true what they're facing if they don't adopt a control on a framework. So it goes a little bit further. It's a longer exercise, but it should be done with everybody. It should be the framework with a risk assessment, do a gap analysis, identify that with the customer, sit down with their leadership, and help them really understand what they're up against.
That's a really good point. You actually triggered something in my head in a conversation a couple of days ago. What we're finding that MSP has been mostly technologists, right? And so their contact point in organization is typically head of IT, CTO organization. One thing that I've been educating, as you start evolving to risk discussion, you sometimes can find, I would say the less mature end client technologists, we don't need to worry about that. One thing I always encourage them is push for the conversation with the CFO, because the CFO is the one that manages risk. The CTO manages technology, the how. The moment they push into the risk conversation, to your point, it changes that dynamic very quickly. Something that CTO said is going to take me time, it's going to cost me money, we're not going to have the budget for it. Well, but you have the conversation with the CFO about the risk, amazing, the wallet purse string unlock, and again, but it really requires that push to talk to the leadership team to be very specific. When we talk about risk, get the CFO in the room, the guy who hold the purse string. They are going to be one to look at to say, is this going to be a material impact of the business if we don't do this?
That is exactly perfect. Yeah, the same way academically that CFOs have learned to identify financial risk is almost the same way that we do cybersecurity risk.
It seems to me that another way to get the attention of senior management, people like the CFO who understand risk, is the compliance angle. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the relationship of frameworks like NIST 2.0 to compliance in various industries, and there's certainly some compliance regimens that cross verticals, right? There, I think about the consumer privacy oriented ones, for instance. But talk about what compliance means in the context of cybersecurity frameworks for MSPs themselves, and what they can do to help their clients with it.
So the adoption of the framework should be the thing that is driving the reduction of risk over time. But the compliance piece is interesting because you don't get jobs from the government if you're not compliant.
Right.
If you can't prove that compliance. But there's other types of compliance now that have been injected, and the FTC guidelines for auto dealerships and accounting firms, and there's a half dozen different types of verticals that now have to have things in place to protect that data. GLBA, if you're looking at FFIEC, you're looking at all those different types of compliances that are out there. Starting out with NIST gives you a good foundation to work from to launch into those higher levels of compliance like SOX 2 Type 2. So I think if you're going to walk before you run, NIST is a great place to start out with that.
Yeah, I think that's always a good thing. Right? If you take a look at all the different compliance programs that you have in place, there's a lot of overlap. Right, like my early days of my career, I was in the toy business, and we do a lot of marketing against kids. So you have corporate compliance. And I got in restaurant business. There's PII. I mean, there's all kind of different things. But what you'll see is if you overlap the controls and compliance policy, it's probably about 80% of it is about the same. It's about how do you manage your data? What is your procedure when something does happen? Right. And then more importantly, at the end of the day, who has control over what set of information be distributed? If you take a look at that, it's very much a common set of things in place. But to translate that, I think that to Peter's point, this is really a simple framework that I put into place, laser focus on the cybersecurity space. And what that does, it turns all these different mythical things into categories of controls. And these controls, technically, it actually turns into action that a MSP can take. The question comes down to is, how do we point them to the right attention? How do you prioritize them? Because I'm sure, like most of the MSP I work with, they got 400 different tools. Does every single one of them say a single pane of glass? Right? If you take it to that is, what are the control that matters? What are the 1% of the signal that most critical that help them to prevent I'll call it to maintain to be a superhero for the end client, so they don't have to think about this. And I think that's really where the industry is shifting to, challenging what is a 1% that matters to prevent. And I think this is a good starting framework to think about that. You get that in place, also you can easily graduate to other framework, because at the end, 80% of what they ask is the same thing. It might be written in different language, in different ways written, but it's really the same.
One thing that I suggest for all the MSPs is you're choosing that repository that you're putting those controls and recording the results and the proof that you're putting in there. Make sure that it can pivot.
Yep.
So if you're working on NIST CSF one day, but you have PCI DSS4 that you have to adhere to next, make sure that tool can take all the work that you've done in the one area and pivot into the other very easily. So you're not having to recreate the wheel every time you adopt a new framework.
Yeah, and also lean in the community, right? Because this is not new. It's been around. I'd always lean into your MSP community and peer. There are people who have done it before. They probably have template that you can run off from. This is not magical, but it is definitely a different, I would say, discipline, right? That you have to work through.
And one thing, feel free to reach out to myself and Carlson. By all means, reach out to us on LinkedIn, however, too. I believe that a rising tide raises all ships.
Yep.
I'm here to support the entire community along with my customers. So
It's fantastic. One of the things I've noted about the evolution of compliance standards here is increasingly seeing specific technologies name checked that I didn't used to before. So very common now to see requirements for multi-factor authentication. We're starting to see EDR being name checked in specific compliance standards, and way more emphasis these days on the recovery piece of things. It seemed to me like the focus was always on defense, and I think regulatory authorities as well as frameworks are starting to recognize that attacks are inevitably going to succeed, breaches are going to happen, and having disciplines, controls in place to help you recover from it are equally important these days, certainly in an age of AI-enabled industrialized ransomware. All right, we're running out of time here. I wanted to get to kind of what I think is a critical opportunity here for our audience here, and I'm sure you guys have spent time thinking about this, is how do we turn familiarity with frameworks, knowledge and skills about compliance into a differentiator, a competitive advantage with the services that we're offering?
So how we've been able to do it is we've taken the relationship with the customer to the next level. So we've let them know that there's a significant difference between what an MSP typically does and what a team of security experts can do to assist them. And when we talk about cybersecurity, it's both in the compliance space and in risk reduction. So if you make that clear distinction in the customer's mind, then it's very easy to have a further conversation that there's another service that we offer that is around compliance or strengthening your risk and your risk aversion. And by doing that, you can open up a whole new market in your existing customer base. You can start to partner with people that are experts in it, bring in experts that know NIST and CMMC and SOX 2 Type 2 that you can partner with to get you off the ground with that. But you can add additional revenue very easily by just bringing that focus and changing the way that the customer views both industries. Because I look at it as two industries. MSP keeps the wheels running, and cybersecurity protects the company.
Yeah, I'll add to this. Quite interesting because I think you speak a lot of what we have also been thinking about, right? I think James, you brought an interesting point. Now there's a lot more focus in the recovery aspect of the equation. MSP has always been about the prevention, defense, and everything we need, right? Then you got the typical financial recovery business, let it in cyber insurance policy that handle the recovery when something happened, when it becomes right of boom versus left of boom. What we have done was kind of interesting is that we have actually created an environment where helping MSP for them to think about how do I make sure all of my security controls are kind of in a blanket, that making sure they are talking to think they're compliant, meaning that MFA is a good example. This, one of my tech, I know most MSPs say, wait, that's happened, but one of the tech turned off MFA just to do a diagnostic, and then the spouse called, can you pick up the kids? But got to flip it back on. Happened more than once, right? When you have those type of control happen, how do you flip and notify in place? A lot of tool set, what we've been kind of spending time making sure that the tech and MSP knows that happens. And then how do you tie that in on the recovery side of the equation? A little bit of what we have done is bringing those two worlds coming together rather than having a cyber insurance policy that says, oh, MSP, you forgot to turn this piece on. So therefore, the policy void. In our case, we're really thinking about how do we help MSP to really bundle into the recovery aspect of the equation. So now they can actually put a financial protection, I will also call it financial guarantee of their service. So even if that switch didn't get flipped on and an incident happened, that recovery happens. It's all managed under one roof. Really similar with Peter, in some ways, really helping the MSP to continue to build new revenue on their model and continue to be that trusted advisor for their end client. It's a very different way of thinking about it. Really bring that two industry together under one roof within the MSP control.
All right, gents, I wish we had an hour to continue the conversation, but we got to move on with our event here. I want to thank Carlson and Peter so much for your contributions here. Encourage the audience to reach out to you on LinkedIn if they'd like to continue the conversation.
Right.
With that, I'll say thanks so much, guys, and say back to you, Fernanda.
Thank you, Carlson, Peter, and James.